The bitter wind was a living thing, a predator with teeth of ice that gnawed at the thin blanket wrapped around her and her son. Ilara held Leo tighter, his small body shivering with a fever she couldn't break. Rain lashed the flimsy plastic of the bus stop, each drop a tiny hammer against their fragile world. This was it, the end of the line. Her wolf whimpered within her, a pathetic, dying sound. She had failed. Her pup was fading in her arms, and all she could offer him was the hollow comfort of a body slowly freezing to death. Then, headlights cut through the deluge, sleek and powerful, belonging to a car that cost more than she ever seen in her life. It stopped. A door opened, and a man stepped out into the storm as if the rain wouldn't dare touch him. He was colossal, wrapped in an aura of such staggering power that her weak inner wolf immediately tried to roll onto its back. His scent hit her, ancient pines, cold mountain air, and raw, undisputed dominance. Alpha King. He walked directly to her, his gaze locking onto Leo's flushed face. He knelt, his expensive suit heedless of the filthy puddle spreading around his knees. "He's sick," the man stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. She flinched, pulling Leo closer. "Please," she whispered, the word tearing from her raw throat. "We don't have anything." The Alpha King's eyes, the color of molten gold, lifted to hers. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he spoke the words that shattered her reality. "I'm not here to take anything," he said, his voice softening just enough to be a caress of sound. "I'm here to take you home." Wait, before the next revelation unfolds. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. Ilara's mind reeled, unable to process the statement. Home? The word was a foreign concept, a ghost of a memory from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Rogues didn't have homes. They had hiding spots, temporary shelters, and the constant gnawing fear of being found. This man, this king, offered a word that was both a promise and a threat. She clutched Leo, her only anchor in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. The man didn't wait for an answer. With a gentleness that seemed utterly at odds with his formidable presence, he scooped both her and Leo into his arms. The blanket, her son, and her own frail body were lifted as if they weighed nothing. She expected cold leather and the sterile scent of wealth inside the car, but instead she was enveloped in warmth. The interior was impossibly soft, and the air hummed with a quiet, controlled power that mirrored its owner. As the door clicked shut, sealing them off from the raging storm, Ilara finally dared to look at her rescuer. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His jaw was sharp, his dark hair was slicked back by the rain, and those golden eyes seemed to see straight through her defenses, into the weary, terrified core of her. He wasn't looking at her, though. His attention was fixed on Leo, his large hand gently brushing the damp hair from her son's forehead. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of protective fury, directed not at her, but at the illness that gripped her child. "He needs a healer. My pack has the best." His pack? The words sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She was a rogue, an outcast. To be brought into a pack's territory, especially the territory of an Alpha King, was a death sentence. They would see her weakness, her scent, marking her as packless and worthless, and they would tear her apart. "We can't," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. They'll kill us. His gaze finally met hers again. There was no pity in it, only a stark, unwavering certainty. No one will touch you. You have my word. His word. The word of a king. It should have been a comfort, but to a woman who had only ever known broken promises, it was just another potential lie. Yet, what choice did she have? Leo coughed weakly, a rattling sound that clawed at her heart. Out there in the storm was certain death. In here, with this powerful, enigmatic stranger, there was at least a chance. She subsided into the seat, the exhaustion of countless sleepless nights and starving days finally crashing over her. As the car moved with impossible smoothness through the city's drenched streets, she watched the man who called himself a king. He hadn't introduced himself, hadn't asked for her name. He had simply appeared, a force of nature answering a prayer she hadn't even had the strength to utter. The journey was a blur. Ilara drifted in and out of consciousness, her awareness tethered to the rhythmic rise of Leo's breathing. Each shallow breath was a victory. They left the city lights behind, plunging into a darkness so profound it felt like they were driving into the heart of the forest itself. They passed through enormous iron gates that seemed to materialize out of the trees, and then she saw it. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress, a sprawling manor of dark stone and timber that rose against the stormy sky like a mountain. Lights glowed from within, warm and inviting, but the sheer scale of the place was terrifying. This was the seat of power, the heart of a kingdom she never knew existed. The car stopped beneath a grand portico, and the door was opened by a man in a crisp uniform. The Alpha King took Leo from her arms before she could protest. "Follow me," he commanded, and she scrambled out of the car, her bare feet hitting the cold, smooth stone of the driveway. She was a mess of wet, dirty rags, a stray animal brought into a palace, and the thought made her want to shrink into the shadows. Inside, the opulence was staggering. A massive fireplace crackled in a great hall, casting dancing shadows on polished wood floors and rich tapestries. Several people, all exuding the same confident aura of pack wolves, stopped and stared as their alpha strode in with a sick child and a drenched, rogue-scented woman. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Whispers followed them like the rustling of dry leaves. He ignored them all, leading her down a wide hallway to a set of double doors. He pushed them open to reveal a room that looked like a private infirmary. A woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair stood waiting, her hands already reaching for Leo. "Alpha Kale," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Put him here." Kale, the name suited him, a name of power and strength. He laid Leo gently on a soft bed, and the healer immediately began her work, her hands glowing with a faint, warm light. Ilara stood frozen in the doorway, feeling useless and out of place. This was his world, his pack, his healer. She was nothing. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable. "She will take care of him. You need to get warm." He gestured for her to follow him again, leading her to a room further down the hall. It was a luxurious bedroom, larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. A fire was already burning in the hearth, and a simple but clean set of clothes, a soft gray tunic and leggings, was laid out on the bed. A door stood ajar, revealing a bathroom with a large steaming tub. "Clean up. Eat," he said, pointing to a tray of food on a small table. A thick stew, fresh bread, and a pitcher of water. It was more food than she'd seen in a week. "My beta, Marcus, will be outside the door. Call him if you need anything." He turned to leave, his presence filling the room, and then, just as quickly, leaving it empty. Why? The word escaped her before she could stop it. He paused at the door, his back to her. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't turn around. "I don't know," he said, his voice low and laced with a strange confusion that seemed at odds with his commanding presence. "When you know, will you tell me?" she asked, a sliver of her old defiance surfacing. He was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said, and then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Ilara stood alone in the magnificent room, the warmth of the fire a stark contrast to the cold fear still gripping her heart. She didn't know if she had been rescued or captured. She only knew that for the first time in a very long time, Leo was warm and safe, and for now, that had to be enough. She forced herself to move. The hot water of the bath was a shock, a pleasure so intense it was almost painful. She scrubbed away the grime of the streets, watching the water turn gray, as if washing away the last few months of her life. The borrowed clothes were soft against her skin, a luxury she hadn't felt in years. She ate the stew ravenously, each spoonful a burst of warmth and flavor that made her want to weep. It was only after her stomach was full and the chill had finally left her bones that the reality of her situation truly began to sink in. She was in the den of the most powerful wolf on the continent, a guest or a prisoner. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to grab her son and disappear back into the anonymity of the human world. But where would she go? Back to the bus stop? Back to starvation and the slow, creeping death of a life on the streets? A soft knock came at the door. "Miss?" a man's voice called. "Marcus, the beta." Ilara opened the door a crack. He was a sturdy man with a calm demeanor, his scent that of earth and loyalty. "The healer says your son is resting. His fever has broken. You can see him if you wish." Relief washed over her so powerfully her knees went weak. "Yes, please." Marcus led her back to the infirmary. Leo was sleeping peacefully, his breathing deep and even. The healer, whose name was Ilara, smiled at her. "He's a strong boy. Just needed some warmth, nutrition, and a little push from my healing gift. He'll be fine." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you." She sat by Leo's bed for hours, holding his small hand, her heart aching with a gratitude so fierce it hurt. She had been ready to die for him, but this Alpha King had saved him. What did he want in return? Kings always wanted something. As dawn approached, casting a pale gray light through the window, Kale returned. He stood in the doorway, watching her. He had changed out of his suit into a simple black shirt and trousers that did little to hide the powerful physique beneath. "He is well," Kale observed. It wasn't a question. "Yes, thanks to you and your healer," she said, her voice quiet. He walked further into the room, his presence once again dominating the space. He stopped beside the bed, looking down at Leo. "What is his name?" "Leo." "And yours?" "Ilara." A flicker of surprise in his golden eyes. "You share a name with my healer." "It seems so." An awkward silence fell between them, thick with unspoken questions. Ilara braced herself. This was it. This was when he would make his demands. "You are a rogue," he stated, his gaze finally settling on her. "I consent it. Your own pack cast you out." She flinched, but didn't deny it. "They said I was too weak. My wolf never fully settled. When I became pregnant, they saw it as a final disgrace. A weak wolf bearing a fatherless pup." She didn't mention that Leo's father had been the Alpha's son, who had denied them both the moment he learned of the pregnancy. The shame was still a raw wound. "There is nothing weak about you," Kale said, his voice a low growl. "Weakness is giving up. You were ready to freeze to death to keep your son warm. That is not weakness. That is strength. His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever called her strong. Not once. She had been labeled weak, useless, a burden. To hear this powerful alpha, this king, say otherwise, it cracked something open inside her, a wall she had carefully built around her heart. "You can stay," he said suddenly, "as long as you need. You and the boy will have a room, food, protection. No one will harm you here." Ilara stared at him, stunned into silence. It was more than she could have ever dreamed of. But the question remained, why? He looked at her, his golden eyes intense, searching. "Last night, I was in my study, 100 miles from that city, and I felt a pull, a sense of desperate need. It was like a string tied to my soul was being yanked hard. I followed it. It led me to you." He looked as confused by his own words as she was. "I don't understand it, but I know I was meant to find you. I know you are meant to be here." His confession was so strange, so impossible, that it felt more honest than any simple explanation he could have given. He wasn't offering charity. He was obeying an instinct he didn't understand. For the first time, a fragile seed of trust began to sprout in the barren ground of Ilara's heart. She looked from the powerful king to her sleeping son, his life a gift from this man. "Okay," she whispered, "we'll stay." The days that followed were a strange dream. Ilara and Leo were moved to a suite of rooms in a quieter wing of the manor. The rooms were beautiful, with a soft bed, warm blankets, and a window that overlooked a vast manicured garden. Leo, fully recovered, was enthralled. He had never had a real bed, never had so many toys, which seemed to appear as if by magic. He was a different child, full of laughter and energy, the shadows of the street already receding from his bright eyes. Ilara, however, remained on edge. The pack members watched her constantly. Their glares were sharp, their whispers venomous. To them, she was a rogue, a filthy stray their alpha had inexplicably brought into their home. The scent of their hostility was a constant, suffocating presence. The worst of them was a she-wolf named Seraphina. She was beautiful, with fiery red hair and a predatory grace, and she was clearly high-ranking. Her scent was one of power and possessiveness, especially when she was near Kael. She made no secret of her disdain for Ilara. "I don't know what game you're playing, rogue," Seraphina hissed at her one afternoon in the hallway, blocking her path. "But the Alpha King is mine. This pack is my birthright. A little stray like you and your half-breed pup don't belong here. He will tire of his little charity project soon enough, and then I will be the one to personally throw you back onto the street where you belong." Ilara flinched at the word half-breed, but stood her ground, her hand protectively on Leo's shoulder. "We were invited to be here," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Seraphina laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "An invitation you can be sure will be rescinded. Enjoy the comfort while it lasts." She swept past, leaving Ilara trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Kael was a distant, commanding presence. He was busy, his days filled with meetings and duties she couldn't begin to comprehend. But he always made time to see them. He would appear in the evenings, sometimes just for a few moments, his gaze assessing them, ensuring they were well. He rarely spoke to Ilara, but he was different with Leo. He would kneel to the boy's level, a rare, small smile touching his lips as Leo chattered on about his day. He brought Leo a carved wooden wolf one evening, and the boy treasured it, sleeping with it every night. Watching them, Ilara felt a confusing mix of emotions. She was grateful for his kindness to her son, but his formal distance with her kept her on guard. There was a chasm between them, of status, of power, of experience, that felt impossible to cross. Yet, sometimes, she would catch him looking at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, his golden eyes filled with that same searching confusion she'd seen on the first night. The invisible string he'd spoken of seemed to hum in the air between them, a low thrum of unspoken tension. One evening, a storm raged outside, echoing the one on the night they had arrived. The wind howled and thunder rattled the thick glass of the windows. Leo, who had never experienced a storm from the safety of a real house, was terrified. He woke from a nightmare, screaming. Elara rushed to his side, trying to comfort him, but he was inconsolable, his small body trembling. The door to their suite opened, and Kyle stood there, drawn by the sound. He took in the scene in a single glance. Without a word, he walked to the bed, sat on the edge, and held out his arms. "Come here, little one," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. Leo, to Elara's astonishment, went to him without hesitation, burying his face in Kyle's strong chest. Kyle wrapped his arms around the boy, holding him securely. "It is only the wind, Leo," he said softly. "It is angry that it cannot get in here, where it is warm. The thunder is just the sky wolf roaring to frighten the wind away. You are safe." He began to tell a story, a low, mesmerizing tale of ancient wolves and forest spirits, his voice a shield against the storm's fury. Elara watched, mesmerized. In that moment, he was not a king, not a powerful alpha. He was just a man, comforting a frightened child with a gentleness that seemed to come from a deep, hidden well within him. Leo's sobs subsided, replaced by sleepy murmurs, and soon he was fast asleep, curled against Kyle's chest. Kyle laid him back down, tucking the blankets around him. He then stood and turned to Elara, who was still standing by the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself. The air was thick with an intimacy that was more potent than any physical touch. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He is a good pup," Kyle said, his gaze soft. "You have raised him well, despite—" He trailed off, not needing to finish. "Despite everything." "I did my best," she said, looking down at her hands. "You did more than that." He took a step closer, and her breath caught in her throat. The room suddenly felt very small. "Elara," he said, and the sound of her name on his lips was a physical touch. "That night, the pull I felt, it gets stronger when I am near you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was terrified of what he was saying, of what it might mean. She was a rogue, a nobody. He was a king. Such things didn't happen. "I don't understand," she whispered, which was the honest truth. "Neither do I," he admitted, his voice a low growl of frustration. "But I will." He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. His skin was warm, and a jolt of electricity, pure and shocking, shot through her. Her inner wolf, so long dormant and weak, stirred within her, stretching and yawning as if waking from a long slumber. Kyle's eyes widened, and he snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. "What was that?" he breathed, staring at her. She shook her head, just as bewildered as he was. I don't know." Before either of them could say another word, the door burst open. Serafina stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. "Kyle, the elders require your presence. There is news of Victor's movements on the northern border." Her eyes darted from Kyle to Elara, taking in their proximity, the charged atmosphere in the room. A possessive, venomous look crossed her face. "Am I interrupting something?" The spell was broken. Kyle's expression shuddered, the king returning to his throne. "No," he said, his voice clipped and formal once more. He gave Ilara one last lingering look before turning and striding from the room, Serafina following closely behind him, casting a triumphant, hateful glare over her shoulder. Ilara was left alone, her cheeks still tingling where he had touched her, her heart in turmoil. The invisible string between them had just become a live wire, and she had no idea if it would lead to salvation or electrocution. The incident in the bedroom changed everything. The charged moment, the undeniable spark that had passed between them, hung in the air whenever Kael was near. He became more withdrawn, his interactions with her becoming brief and formal again, as if trying to deny what had happened. But she saw the way his eyes followed her, the tension in his jaw when another male pack member even spoke to her. The string he spoke of was tightening, pulling them together, while circumstance and duty tried to tear them apart. Serafina, emboldened by Kael's withdrawal, escalated her campaign of torment. She and her sycophants would corner Ilara, whispering insults, accidentally shouldering her in the halls, and leaving dead vermin on her doorstep. They treated her like dirt, a contamination in their pure pack. Ilara bore it with quiet dignity, her focus solely on Leo. As long as he was safe and happy, she could endure anything. But her own wolf was growing restless. Kael's presence, his power, was like a sun coaxing a dormant seed to life. She felt stronger, more alert. The pathetic whimper of her inner wolf was slowly being replaced by a low, steady growl. The pack held a seasonal ceremony, the Great Hunt, to celebrate the autumn equinox. It was a deeply traditional event, and Kael, as king, was expected to lead it. Custom dictated that a high-ranking she-wolf ride with him, a position of honor that everyone assumed would go to Serafina, his presumed future mate. The entire pack gathered in the central courtyard at dawn. The air was crisp and cool, filled with excitement and the earthy scent of wolves ready to run. Ilara watched from a balcony with Leo, feeling like an outsider at a family celebration. Kael emerged, dressed in traditional leathers, looking every bit the powerful king. He addressed his pack, his voice ringing with authority. Then he turned to the matter of his partner for the hunt. A hush fell over the crowd. Serafina stepped forward, a smug, expectant smile on her face. Kael's golden eyes scanned the crowd, passing over Serafina without pause. They swept up to the balconies and, for a heart-stopping moment, they met Ilara's. The world seemed to fall away. The string between them vibrated with a force that left her breathless. He saw her, not as a rogue or a charity case, but as her. In that moment, a silent conversation passed between them, a question and an answer that no one else could hear. Then he looked away, his gaze settling on a respected elder. "My mother rode with my father for 50 years, Kael announced, his voice booming across the courtyard. "This year, in her memory, I ride alone." A collective gasp went through the pack. It was a stunning break from tradition. Serafina's face went white with shock, then contorted in a mask of pure rage and humiliation. Her eyes flew to Ilara, and the hatred in them was so potent it was like a physical blow. She knew Kael's decision was because of the rogue on the balcony. The hunt began, and the pack disappeared into the forest, a blur of fur and primal energy. The manor felt strangely quiet without them. Ilara took Leo to the gardens, trying to shake off the unease Serafina's glare had left behind. They were by a small ornamental pond when she appeared, flanked by two of her largest cronies. "You," Serafina snarled, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won, don't you? You think a little pity and a pretty face can win you a king?" I don't want anything," Ilara said, moving Leo behind her. Please, just leave us alone." "Leave you alone," Serafina laughed. "You come into our home, you bewitch our alpha, you make a mockery of our traditions. You will pay for that." She took a menacing step forward. "You're weak. I can smell it. Your wolf is broken. I wonder what will happen if I just push a little." Before Ilara could react, Serafina shoved her hard. Ilara stumbled backward, her feet tangling, and she fell into the icy water of the pond with a splash. It was shallow, but the shock of the cold stole her breath. Leo screamed, "Mommy!" Anger, fierce and protective, surged through Ilara. But before she could even get to her feet, Serafina's followers grabbed Leo. He struggled, crying out in terror. That was the breaking point. Seeing her son in their hands, hearing his terrified cries, something inside Ilara snapped. It wasn't just anger. It was a primal, ancient rage, a power she had never known she possessed. The air around her crackled. The water in the pond began to bubble, not from heat, but from a strange, silver energy that was pouring out of her. Her eyes, normally a soft hazel, began to glow with a brilliant, ethereal light. A wave of pure force erupted from her, throwing Serafina and her cronies back as if they were dolls. They landed in a heap, stunned and gasping. The two holding Leo were thrown clear, and he scrambled away, running towards the manor. Ilara rose from the water, which was now swirling around her in a vortex of shimmering energy. She didn't feel the cold. She didn't feel fear. She only felt power, a vast, untapped ocean of it that was now roaring to the surface. She was more than a wolf. She was something else entirely. Serafina stared at her, her face a mixture of terror and disbelief. What are you?" she stammered. At that moment, the hunting party returned, drawn by the commotion and the surge of raw energy. Kale was at the forefront. He skidded to a halt, his eyes widening in shock as he took in the scene. Serafina on the ground, the swirling energy, and Ilara standing in the center of it all, glowing like a vengeful goddess. The entire pack stared, their hunt forgotten. The whispers started immediately, but they were no longer of contempt. They were of fear, fear of the unknown. Kale's face was a storm of conflicting emotions: shock, awe, suspicion, and something that looked devastatingly like betrayal. He had offered her sanctuary, and she had hidden this immense, terrifying power from him. The string between them, once a source of confusion and attraction, now felt like a chain, binding him to a secret that could threaten everything he had built. He took a step toward her, his voice low and laced with a cold authority she had never heard him use with her before. "Ilara," he said, his eyes hard. "What is this? What are you?" The light began to fade from her, the energy receding as her protective rage subsided, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. She looked at the terrified faces of the pack, at the suspicion in Kale's eyes, and she knew she had made a terrible mistake. She hadn't just revealed a secret. She had become a monster in their eyes. The sanctuary he had offered had just become a cage, and she was the creature trapped inside. The aftermath was a suffocating silence. The pack members who had once looked at her with contempt now viewed her with a mixture of awe and terror. They gave her a wide berth, whispering behind their hands, their sense thick with fear and suspicion. She was no longer the weak rogue. She was a dangerous anomaly, an unknown quantity. And in the world of shifters, the unknown was always a threat. She was escorted back to her rooms, but they no longer felt like a safe haven. They felt like a prison. Leo was brought to her, and he clung to her, his small body still trembling from the ordeal in the garden. He didn't understand what had happened, only that his mother had done something amazing and scary to protect him. He looked at her with wide, trusting eyes, and it was the only thing that kept her from shattering completely. Kale did not come. For 2 days, she was left in isolation. Food was left outside her door, but no one spoke to her. The king who had pulled her from the storm, who had held her son and touched her cheek with such gentleness, was now a distant, cold judge. The betrayal she had seen in his eyes haunted her. He believed she had deceived him, had come into his home under false pretenses. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? She had never known she possessed such power. It had lain dormant, a sleeping giant within her, awakened only by the threat to her child. Late on the second night, he finally appeared. He didn't knock. The door opened, and he was there, his face grim, his golden eyes like chips of ice. He was flanked by Marcus and 2 other formidable-looking guards. The message was clear. This was not a social visit. This was an interrogation. "Tell me what you are," he commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. Elara stood before him, her chin held high, though her heart was pounding. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I never knew I could do that. It only happened because they had Leo." "They?" he questioned, one eyebrow raised. Seraphina had clearly told her own version of the story, one where she was the innocent victim of a rogue's unprovoked magical attack. "Seraphina pushed me into the pond. Her followers grabbed my son. I was afraid and angry." Kale's gaze was piercing, searching for any hint of deception. "Seraphina claims you attacked her without provocation." "She's lying," Elara said, her voice shaking with the injustice of it. "She has hated me since the day I arrived." Kale turned to his beta. "Marcus, you have a gift for sensing truth. What do you feel?" Marcus, who had always been civil to her, looked at Elara, his expression serious. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked at his alpha. "The rogue speaks the truth, my king. There is no deceit in her." Kale's expression didn't change, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. He dismissed Marcus and the guards with a flick of his hand, leaving them alone. The room was suddenly charged with the same tension as the night of the storm, but this time it was laced with accusation and hurt. "Even if what you say is true," Kale said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "it doesn't change the fact that you possess a power you kept hidden from me, a power our oldest legends speak of, the Sages of Light. They were healers and protectors, wolves born with a connection to the life force of the earth itself. It was a power thought to be extinct, wiped out in the ancient wars." He began to pace the room like a caged lion. "There are prophecies, warnings, that one would be born with the old power, one who could either save our kind or plunge us into an age of darkness. How do I know which one you are? How do I know you are not a weapon sent by my enemies to destroy me from within?" His words were like daggers, each one striking a fresh wound. He didn't see her. He saw a prophecy, a potential threat. The connection she had felt, the fragile trust she had started to build, it was all gone, replaced by suspicion. "I am not a weapon," she said, tears finally spilling from her eyes. "I am a mother who was trying to protect her son. I am the woman you pulled from the rain. Nothing else has changed." "Everything has changed," he roared, turning on her, his control finally snapping. His eyes blazed with golden fire. "You have made my home a place of fear. My pack looks to me for strength and stability, and I brought a living, breathing omen into our midst. I am a king, Elara. My first duty is to them, to their safety." His duty, his pack, she understood. She was an outsider, a risk he couldn't afford. The brief, beautiful dream of finding a home, of being safe, was over. Heartbreak, sharp and brutal, tore through her. It was worse than the cold, worse than the hunger. This was the pain of a hope being crushed. "I see," she said, her voice hollow. She wiped her tears away with a fierce gesture. "Then we will leave. We will not be a threat to you or your pack any longer." The thought of returning to the streets, of facing that life again, was terrifying. But staying here, where she was seen as a monster by the one person who had shown her kindness, was unbearable. Cale stared at her, his anger seeming to drain away, replaced by a deep, aching conflict. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The string between them was now a tangled, painful knot. He had a duty to his pack, but his instincts, the very soul of his wolf, screamed at him that letting her go was a mistake of catastrophic proportions. "I will make arrangements," he said, finally, his voice strained. "You will be given supplies. You will be escorted to the edge of the territory." It was a dismissal, a final, clinical severing of their connection. He turned and left without another word, the heavy click of the door sealing her fate. Ilara sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees as a storm of grief broke inside her. She had been found only to be lost again. She had been given a home only to have it ripped away. She had dared to feel a spark of hope, a flicker of affection for a powerful king. And now she was left with nothing but the ashes. The next morning felt like a funeral. A grim-faced Marcus arrived with a backpack of supplies, food, water, a small pouch of money, and warmer clothes for her and Leo. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The shame and conflict of the entire pack seemed to be concentrated in his downcast gaze. Ilara dressed herself and her son in silence. Leo was confused. "Are we going on an adventure, Mommy?" he asked, his voice full of innocent excitement. Ilara's heart broke. She knelt and looked into his bright, trusting eyes. "Yes, sweetie, a new adventure. Just the two of us, like before." She tried to smile, but it felt like her face was cracking. "Will King Kyle come with us?" Ilara couldn't answer. She just shook her head, and the hope in her son's eyes dimmed. He understood more than she gave him credit for. He knew they were being sent away. She took one last look around the beautiful rooms that had been her sanctuary. It had been a brief respite, a glimpse of a life she could never have. With Leo's small hand in hers, she walked out, her head held high. The journey through the manor was a gauntlet of hostile and fearful stares. Seraphina stood in the great hall, a look of undisguised triumph on her face. Ilara met her gaze and saw the cold, petty victory there. She had won. The rogue was being exiled. Kyle was nowhere to be seen. He was sparing himself the pain of a farewell, or perhaps he simply didn't care enough to offer one. The thought was a fresh twist of the knife. As Marcus led them toward the main gates, a frantic shout echoed from the manor. A guard came sprinting towards them, his face pale with panic. "Beta, the northern perimeter has been breached. It's Victor. He's here." Marcus swore, his hand immediately going to the hilt of the blade at his belt. "Victor? What does he want?" At that moment, a howl of pure savagery split the air, followed by the sounds of a brutal fight. Dark shapes, massive wolves with mangy fur and crazed red eyes, poured from the woods. They were Victor's rogues, a feral army bound by nothing but bloodlust and loyalty to their ruthless alpha. Their scent was one of death and madness. Marcus shoved Ilara and Leo behind him. "Get back to the manor, now!" he roared. But it was too late. A hulking wolf, larger than the others, leaped from the trees, landing directly in their path. It shifted, its bones cracking and reforming into the shape of a man with a scarred face and cruel, intelligent eyes. Victor. His gaze swept past Marcus, past the guards, and landed on Ilara. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "There you are," he said, his voice a gravelly purr. "The little light I've been hunting for so long." He ignored the pack warriors closing in on him, his attention utterly fixed on her. "Did you really think you could hide in Kale's little kingdom? I have been tracking your bloodline for a decade, the sages of light. Your power is a delicacy, and I have waited a very long time to feast." Fear, cold and absolute, seized Ilara. This was what Kale had been afraid of. This was the enemy he'd thought she might be aligned with. Victor lunged, not at the warriors, but at Leo. He was impossibly fast. He snatched the boy, holding him up by the front of his shirt. Leo cried out, his legs kicking in the air. "Let him go!" Ilara screamed, a primal terror eclipsing everything else. "He is just a child." "He is your child," Victor sneered. "He may carry the same spark. He is leverage." A blur of black fur erupted from the manor. Kale. He launched himself at Victor with a roar of pure fury, a king defending his territory. But Victor was ready. He threw Leo aside like a rag doll and met Kale's charge. The two alphas crashed together in a maelstream of claws and teeth. Ilara didn't hesitate. She scrambled to Leo's side. He was stunned, but alive. Her focus narrowed to a single point: her son. The world dissolved into a cacophony of snarls, screams, and the clash of bodies. Victor's rogues were overwhelming Kale's warriors. Kale was a phenomenal fighter, but Victor was his equal, and his feral pack fought with a suicidal frenzy. Ilara saw it all with a horrifying clarity. Kale was going to lose. His pack was going to be slaughtered, and it was all because of her. Victor wanted her. This was her fault. A cold resolve settled over her, displacing the fear. She was not the weak, helpless woman from the bus stop. She was not the confused creature from the garden pond. She knew what she was now. She was a mother, and she was a sage of light. She gently pushed Leo behind a large stone pillar. "Stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound. I will come back for you. I promise." She kissed his forehead. Then she stood up and walked into the heart of the battle. She raised her hands, and the power, her power, answered her call. It wasn't a wild, uncontrolled surge this time. It was a focused, deliberate river of silver light. It flowed from her, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a shield of life. The light washed over Kale's wounded warriors. Gashes knitted shut, broken bones mended, and their exhaustion was replaced by a surge of renewed strength. They roared, fighting with twice their previous ferocity. The tide of the battle began to turn. Kale, locked in a brutal struggle with Victor, felt the wave of her power. He glanced over and saw her, standing in the middle of the chaos, a beacon of calm, brilliant light. She wasn't an omen of destruction. She was their salvation. And he had been about to send her away. The realization of his monumental foolishness hit him with more force than any of Victor's blows. He had let fear and pride blind him. He had broken the trust of the one person his soul had called out for. Victor saw her too, his eyes burning with avarice. "The power," he bellowed, shoving Kale back. "It will be mine." He charged toward Ilara. Kale roared and tried to intercept him, but two of Victor's largest rogues slammed into him, bearing him to the ground. He could only watch in horror as Victor closed in on the woman he now knew with absolute certainty was his mate. Ilara didn't flinch as the brutal Alpha rushed her. She stood her ground, her gaze locked on his. He was a creature of darkness and death. She was a creature of light and life. This was always meant to be their battle. As he reached for her, she dropped her hands, and the healing light vanished, only to be replaced by something else. A blinding, concussive blast of pure white energy erupted from her, striking Victor square in the chest. He was thrown backward, tumbling through the air as if hit by a thunderbolt, and crashed into the manor wall with enough force to crack the stone. He slumped to the ground, unconscious and broken. A stunned silence fell over the battlefield. Victor's rogues, seeing their leader fall, faltered. Their frenzy broke, replaced by confusion and fear. Kale threw off his attackers and rose to his feet. He looked at Ilara, who was swaying, the effort of wielding so much power having drained her completely. He walked to her, his movements slow and deliberate. His pack parted before him. He stopped in front of her, his golden eyes filled with a storm of regret, awe, and a love so profound it was breathtaking. He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Before she could answer, he turned to face his pack, his voice ringing out with the unquestionable authority of a king making his most important decree. "This woman is Ilara of the Sages of Light. She is not a threat. She is our protector. She is my mate, your Luna Queen." He looked back at her, his heart in his eyes. He leaned in and kissed her, a claiming, a promise, a desperate prayer for forgiveness in front of his entire pack. The warriors, their wounds healed by her light, knelt as one. They had seen her power. They had seen her courage. They had heard their king's claim. They bowed their heads not to a rogue, but to their new queen. The aftermath of the battle was swift. Victor and his surviving rogues were imprisoned, their threat neutralized. The manor, once a place of tension and fear for Ilara, was transformed. The pack members who had scorned her now looked at her with reverence and respect. They had witnessed a miracle. They had witnessed the return of a legend and the claiming of their Luna Queen. Serafina was brought before Kale and Ilara in the Great Hall. Stripped of her arrogance, she was just a bitter, defeated wolf. Kale exiled her, a punishment far kinder than the treason she had committed deserved, a quiet testament to the mercy Ilara had brought back into his heart. Ilara found herself in a whirlwind. She was fitted for beautiful gowns, taught the history of the pack and the duties of a Luna. It was overwhelming, but Kale was a constant, steady presence at her side. The distance between them was gone, replaced by a deep and growing intimacy. He was not just a king. He was a man full of deep emotions, burdened by immense responsibility, and haunted by the fear of failure. He shared his vulnerabilities with her, and she, in turn, told him everything. About Leo's father, about the cruelty of her old pack, about the years of lonely desperation. They talked for hours, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered, forging a bond that was stronger than any prophecy. He showed her ancient texts that spoke of her power, helping her to understand the gift she possessed. It was a power of balance, of life, and it had chosen her for her strength of heart, not her physical prowess. One evening, he led her to the balcony overlooking the gardens, the same place where she had been attacked. The moon was full and bright, bathing the world in a soft, silver light. "I was a fool, Ilara," he said, his voice a low, remorseful rumble. He took her hands in his. I let the fears of my ancestors and the whispers of others drown out the one voice I should have listened to, the voice of my own soul. It called for you, and I almost let you go. You were trying to protect your people, she said softly. It is what a king must do. A king must also recognize his queen, he countered, his golden eyes intense. My wolf knew you from the moment I saw you, shivering in that bus stop. I was just too blind to see it. Can you forgive me for my blindness? There is nothing to forgive, she whispered, her heart swelling with love for this powerful, humbled man. You saved us, Kyle. You gave us a home when we had nothing. You gave me a home, Ilara, he said, pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. This was just a fortress before you came. You and Leo, you made it a home. He kissed her then, a slow, tender kiss under the moonlight that sealed their bond, a final promise that they were now and forever mates. The physical act of their mating came later, a passionate, loving union that was both a culmination of their journey and the beginning of a new one. It was a merging of souls, of light and strength, of a lonely king and a resilient survivor who had found their other half. In the quiet days that followed, Ilara found her place. She was not just Kyle's mate, she was a leader in her own right. Her gentle wisdom and innate compassion won the hearts of the pack. She taught the healers how to use simple herbal remedies, she started a school for the pups, and she spent time with the elders, listening to their stories. She brought a warmth and balance to the pack that had been missing. She and Kyle ruled side by side, a perfect partnership. He was the unyielding shield of the pack, and she was its beating heart. Leo thrived, no longer a half-breed outcast, but the cherished son of the Alpha King and Luna Queen, loved and protected by an entire pack. He had a father, a real family, and a future filled with promise. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after her arrival, Ilara stood on that same balcony with Kale, watching Leo play in the gardens below. Her son's laughter echoed in the clear air, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Kale wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The chill in the air was a gentle reminder of the coming winter, but she felt nothing but warmth, wrapped in his embrace. She leaned back against his strong chest, a sense of peace settling deep in her soul. The scared, homeless woman from the bus stop was a ghost, a distant memory. In her place stood a queen, a mate, a mother, who had faced the storm and found her true north. She was home.